Okay, so to get us started, I'm going to hand it over to Dimitri.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to join all of you here today. I'm coming to you from the unceded territory of the Gahaga people in what we now call Montreal. And this is the land on which I'm privileged to live and work. I've been asked, as we all have, to say a little bit of our background before we launch into the subject. I'm a lawyer, activist and journalist, and a proud and avowed eco-socialist. I have served in the shadow cabinets of the Green Parties of Canada and Quebec as the justice critic. And in 2020, I ran to be the leader of the Green Party of Canada on an eco-socialist platform and finished second. Declined, however, to participate in the ongoing and most recent leadership contest for reasons perhaps we can get into later. In any event, happy to be here. I've thought a lot about, what I wanted to say within the 15 minutes, allotted to each of us. And I think I'd like to begin, elucidating my point of view on where, eco-socialism must go, how we can advance the cause of democratic socialism within our society by talking about the truckers' convoy. And now I'm going to raise this subject and tell you about an experience I had because I was hearing, as we were listening to a quite critical and understandably critical mainstream media and political narrative about the convoy, I was hearing from people who had supported, not many, but some, who had supported my campaign for the leadership contest and who had, I think, demonstrated to me personally that they were committed to the cause of socialism, that they actually felt some sympathy for the truckers' convoy. And that the fundamental message of the convoy was being misconstrued, miscommunicated, and misunderstood by the public with the enthusiastic support of the political class and the media. And I found this to be rather surprising based on what I was hearing. So I decided to go down to the truckers' convoy myself. I went there the last 2 days, and I spent 2 days in the bitter cold walking around. My daughter, by the way, lives in Ottawa. She's attending the University of Ottawa, and her apartment was right on the path that the trucks had taken into the center of Ottawa. And I just had to walk along her street, Ken Street, down to Parliament Hill, and it was wall-to-wall trucks. And I walked up and down that, I'd say, path of about 2 kilometers. I spoke to many people who were protesting. I didn't tell them why I was there. I just started conversations with them about their concerns. I read many messages that had been handwritten on the sides of these trucks. Some of them were covered in handwriting by dozens of people. There were placards everywhere. There were signs everywhere. And then I got to the front line at the very moment that the riot police began to move in. And, I was standing with the protesters. I wasn't wearing a press jacket. And frankly, as a lawyer, I felt kind of exposed that I might be arrested as a protester. I was there simply as an observer. But I felt I had to do that to see how people were actually conducting themselves. And there was a wall of people, protesters, that was maybe 4 or 5 persons deep. And then 1 meter away from them, standing face to face with them, was a phalanx of riot police who were very methodically moving up the street and arresting anybody who, who refused to move aside. And I'll tell you that I did not see not a single act of violence anywhere during that time period. I did not hear a single threat of violence. I saw people who were constantly telling other protesters, people who were protesters, not to engage violently with the police, not to threaten acts of violence, but to go peacefully if they were arrested. I saw many messages of love. I did not see a single expression of racism, anti-immigrant hostility. And there was, frankly, a lot of camaraderie as far as I could tell. Now, this was a very white gathering. That was very clear. I think that a lot of these people were definitely, you know, of a right-wing orientation. Some of them were undoubtedly of a far-right orientation. The fundamental message of a lot of these people was one that I didn't necessarily agree with, but really what I was hearing was that they were opposed to vaccine mandates. I'm vaccinated, everybody in my family's vaccinated, but they were opposed to vaccine mandates. And vaccine mandates, if you know, this is an issue, mandating vaccination, which raises serious ethical considerations. And you can just gather that, if you don't have that you yourself, by going to the World Health Organization website, you know, and seeing what they have to say about the question of vaccine mandates, the complexity of the issue, the ethical complexity of the issue. So they were raising I thought a concern which merited discussion, respectful discussion. And a lot of them were coming from a place of profound distrust of government. A lot of them were coming from a place of profound distrust of the pharmaceutical industry. And I as an eco-socialist, have no difficulty believing that, in fact, you know, the population has a lot of reason to be distrustful of the government. The government is given ample reason to be distrustful. And sometimes that distrust is misplaced, sometimes it's excessive, but the causes of it are there. They're clear to us, they should be clear to us, as are the causes of the distrust of the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, one has only to look at, for example, the opioid crisis and OxyContin and the role that that played, a very lucrative drug, in generating this devastating crisis. And we could go on and on about, you know, the betrayals of trust from the pharmaceutical industry and so forth. Now, does that mean the vaccines are unsafe? Of course not. But there was, underlying all of this, you know, legitimate reasons for distrust. And what I took away from this whole experience, it was really, I think, sort of pivotal for me to see with my own eyes during those 48 hours. What I saw is that we as eco-socialists, I think, have failed to learn how to dialogue with people who are not necessarily hostile to the fundamental values of eco-socialism, democratic socialism. In fact, a lot of what they want, if you talk to them in terms of policies, not in terms of ideologies, in terms of issues, and propose solutions to them that will address those issues and have a positive impact upon their lives, and don't frame it in ideological terms, and you give them the respect of speaking to them and listening to them rather than demonizing them and vilifying them, you may find that you can actually, at least on limited issues, and perhaps more broadly on a program of you know, socialist transformation, gain a lot of support from people who are currently, for whatever reasons, feeling that their interests are better represented by the right. We on the left need to do a much better job of understanding why people sometimes gravitate to the right. People, working people, impoverished people, even sometimes racialized people will gravitate to the right. Why do they do that? We can only ascertain the answer to that question and address it by dialoguing with those people rather than demonizing them and vilifying them. And this brings me to the subject of the Ukraine war. You know, there are voices on the right and the left, I'm one of them, and I feel very, very strongly about this issue, who are calling for a negotiated resolution to the war in Ukraine. And the only way that that can be achieved is by a willingness by both sides to make meaningful concessions to the others. There is no negotiated solution to this war that involves complete capitulation by either side. A capitulation will only be achieved by military means. Whether it's a Russian capitulation or a Ukrainian capitulation, it will only be achieved by military means. And that will result in extraordinary pain and suffering for the Ukrainian people, to a lesser degree to the other peoples within Europe, including the Russian people. And it may end up ensnaring us all in a nuclear holocaust, the ultimate disaster for all of humanity, for the entire planet. So what is in fact happening within our society? You know, people on the left are taking people on the right who are actually adopting, most of them aren't, but some are, who are taking people on the right who are adopting an anti-war posture towards the Ukraine war and calling for us to stop sending weaponry to Ukraine, stop escalating the conflict, and engage in a dialogue. You know, one such person, by the way, is Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger recently came out and said that the Ukrainians, it's time for them to sit down at the table with the Russians and talk about a peace deal, which involves swapping Land for Peace. And he was absolutely excoriated for saying something which is an entirely legitimate perspective, including and particularly by people on the left. You know, I have no problem talking to somebody on the right who wants to advocate for a peaceful resolution to the war in Ukraine. This is an existential threat to humanity, and I'm not going to refuse to speak to them, nor am I going to demonize them because they happen to support some political party or some politician whom I personally disapprove of. I'm going to find common ground with these people where I can. And right now, there is so little impetus for a peaceful resolution to the war in Ukraine that it would be idiotic for people like myself, who are adamantly opposed to the escalation of this war and profoundly worried about it, to refuse to talk to people on the right who share my perspective on how to deal with this war. And so we on the left need to learn how to talk to people on the right who are prepared to find common ground with us on certain issues. And we need to learn how to talk to them in a way which shows understanding and empathy for their fundamental concerns and what's driving them to vote for right-wing parties and right-wing politicians. We should not avoid opportunities for dialogue with this segment of the electorate. And so that's the fundamental message, which I think we on the left should take away from what's happening in the world today and what's been happening for the last couple of years in our society and more broadly in the West. You know, and the last thing I want to say, I was talking to, you know, over lunch today, I was with a friend who shares my views on all of these subjects. And my friend comes from rural communities and, you know, an avowed socialist, but grew up in a very traditional Christian, conservative, right-leaning environment. And she said to me something very interesting. She said, you know, collectivism is, it's alive and well in rural communities. It's sort of the foundation of rural communities. And if you actually found a way to talk about, you know, a socialist agenda that is at least non-ideological in its terminology, but emphasizes the spirit of collectivism, you would find a lot of sympathy amongst people within rural communities. But we on the left have failed to do that. We have failed to see where we can find common ground with people who come from that kind of a culture and that kind of environment. The opportunities exist, but we've squandered them. And so, you know, I would like to conclude by, again, emphasizing the risk of my repeating myself. We should be willing to dialogue with people wherever we may find them on the political spectrum who will make common ground with us on the values and policies that should be near and dear to the left. And it's taken me a long time as a politician and activist to understand that. And I hope that, you know, we can have a robust discussion about that today and a respectful discussion. Thank you.
Ago today, voters decided that I needed to devote more time to the struggle for eco-socialism, and so they opted to end this stage of my service as an elected official. I'm grateful for the break, and I'm eager to dig in at the grassroots level to strengthen capacity for future victories. So the context I think that's important to consider, and it's been noted by other speakers, is the context of colonization and the history of these lands. There's the climate crisis, which is an existential crisis, not only for humans, but for other species. And then there's the inequality crisis that has undermined all of our communities, well, for a considerable time, even before the current economic system. And all of these crises are associated in different ways with the current mode of organizing the human species, which is the capitalist mode of production. And that system has been the historic object of attack for the partisans in the socialist movement in Canada and other lands. Now, when we look at the context in BC, certainly the internal crisis within the BC NDP is a major question facing leftists. I've studied the history of the left in quite a bit of detail in BC, specifically the CCF and NDP tradition. My doctoral work in history focused specifically on the transition from the CCF to the NDP and the connection with organized labor. I published that research in the book Militant Minority, British Columbia Workers and the Rise of the New Left. And more recently, I've worked with Bob, helping him publish his memoirs. So I'm not an outside observer when it comes to the history of the NDP in BC. And I think it's not a stretch to describe the current crisis as the biggest internal crisis that the BC NDP has ever faced in its 61 years of existence. If I'm wrong, I hope Bob could point that out, because I'm sure he was participating directly in many battles from the late 1960s until the 2000s. So I might be wrong, but from my read of it, in terms of an entire, essentially the front running leadership race, from everything I've heard, that Anjali had enough membership signups to win. And so to have a dissident leadership candidate sideline, particularly the apparent front runner, is unprecedented in the history of the NDP in BC. So we are at a major turning point for the left in this province. I think it does signal the transition, or it's a part of the process of the NDP's transition to becoming a liberal party, and moving away from its social democratic and democratic socialist traditions. I don't know if that process is complete or not. Each of us will make our own determination, but it's certainly troubling. I think it's a moment of reflection, and it's a moment, I think, for leftists to determine their relationship to the NDP and to other formations, and to determine what steps come next. I think the crisis in the BC NDP, it demonstrates the process that some political scientists have described as institutionalization, or the process of self-preservation that's inherent in all institutions. That phenomenon was discussed by scholars in the European context. If we look at the work of Maurice Dvorak or Roberto Michels, talking about institutionalization within the social democratic parties of Europe in the early 20th century. In the Canadian context, sociologist Leo Zakuta looked at this process in the CCF in Ontario in his book, A Protest Movement Becalmed. And there's literally dozens of scholars who've looked at that dynamic in the NDP, both in BC and also nationally. I think the current crisis we're in, and beyond just the current crisis in the NDP, a key factor is the withering of the working class movement as a radical and militant force in the politics of BC and Canada. For a considerable segment of the 20th century, the Communist Party served as a fighting force within British Columbia's labor movement. Separate from any debates over the Soviet Union and the correct or incorrect path of the Russian Revolution, the fact is that on the ground, members of the Communist Party provided progressive leadership in their unions, and sometimes on city councils, on school boards, in women's organizations, and in other community organizations, and often held the NDP and other institutions' feet to the fire. And even into the 1980s, Communist Party militants held important positions in the leadership of unions like the BC Teachers Federation and the Vancouver City Workers Union and the Hospital Employees Union and the Fishermen's Union and other organizations. And we have certainly seen a waning of that militant and radical leadership within the labor movement. When we talk about militancy, we can think of it as a willingness to fight. So an openness to more aggressive tactics and to stand up to institutions. When we think of radicalism, it has to do with describing the character of the ideas and how far beyond the status quo the ideas go. And so both measured against, from a standpoint of militancy and radicalism, I think the current state of the working class movement is not at a high point. And that's related to the process of institutionalization within labor and also divisions within the working class. We have the unionized working class, which is generally better paid, protected from some of the worst excesses of capitalism by a collective bargaining relationship with employers. often protected by benefits, pensions, and other forms of economic security that non-unionized workers lack. And there certainly is a level of complacency and comfort that can settle in, both among unionized workers, but also among their leadership. There's a description in Roberto Michael's book about German social democracy, how the former shop floor militants, when they become ensconced within a union bureaucracy, they no longer have the calluses on their hand from working the shop floor. And qualitatively, they become different in terms of their role within the working class, and their class position actually changes. And they no longer, their interests are no longer aligned with dismantling capitalist exploitation, because they are benefiting in some ways from being officials and functionaries within the capitalist system in terms of managing the labor supply under capitalism. There's also other fault lines and fissures within the working class along the lines of gender, ethnicity, sexuality, ability, age, region, and all of those are factors for the left to take into account in determining the course ahead. There's the phenomenon that's been described as false consciousness, where workers, whether unionized or non-unionized, identify with their boss's interests rather than their own. And a political economist named Karl Marx talked about this in a work from 1845 called The German Ideology. And what Marx said was that, quote, "The ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas. The class, which is the ruling material force of society, is at the same time its ruling intellectual force." So leftists need to accept the fact that the strongest ideas, the ones that are going to be getting the most traction with the people we're trying to organize, aren't our ideas, it's the boss's ideas, and it's the ideas of those who are at the top of the economic order. And so it's always an uphill battle, which can be described as the battle of ideas, to win the ideas of working class people and other marginalized people, equity-seeking people, and others that we seek to enlist in the struggle, to win them over to our ideas and win them away from the ideas of the bosses. So what do we do? I guess there was another political economist who described it as what is to be done. I think we need to organize at the grassroots level. There certainly are various levels of organization, but I think the basic building block is at the grassroots. And the first task in organizing at the grassroots level is to engage in that battle of ideas. So to put forward our ideas as a pole of attraction for community members to come towards. We also need to work at the grassroots level to put pressure on various institutions to move in the direction that we want them to move in, both in terms of the ideology, but also specific policies and demands. So this includes putting pressure on unions, on the local, provincial and federal governments, and on other institutions. So organizing at the grassroots level, 1, to engage in the battle of ideas, 2, to put pressure on various institutions, 3, to build communities of solidarity. And we can think of these communities of solidarity as safe havens for radicals and troublemakers and dreamers in a turbulent and oftentimes hostile world. So creating that safe haven is essential if we're going to have people join our movement, participate in our movement, stay in our movement, and participate long-term, viewing it as a lifelong project of social change, a marathon rather than a sprint. And a part of building those communities of solidarity, or that safe haven for the radicals and the dreamers, is being kind and supportive of one another, appealing to each other's best angels, suppressing our own worst demons, and holding each other to high standards of conduct in our dealings with each other and our dealings with the broader community. So I think these are some of the key ingredients for building a fighting eco-socialist force. Building a force that will have strong, enduring, powerful groups of radicals and dreamers in each community who have the capacity to influence the course of events in these local communities, as well as the capacity to exert pressure in the regional, provincial, federal, and international stages. And then there's the question of federating these local grassroots networks of radicals and dreamers together into higher levels of association and a more powerful and integrated fighting force. Time constraints and also the challenges associated with that question of how do the eco-socialists in all communities and all lands federate together to dismantle capitalist exploitation perhaps needs to be added to the agenda for our next meeting. But I think that's a question we can't escape answering if we are serious about building the world of our dreams and a world which is essential for the survival of both the human species as well as other forms of life. So those are some preliminary thoughts that I would offer, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ben. And thanks for switching your headphone. That worked.
You're
great.
welcome.
Next up, we have Ashley. Ashley, over to you.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. I am coming to you from the stolen lands of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, otherwise known as Victoria in so-called BC. And I guess, who am I? I'm not a lawyer. Maybe I'm the odd one out here. I am an activist. I am a mother of 3. I am the chair of the BC NDP Standing Committee on Environment and Economy. And for the last few months, I have gotten no sleep because I've been organizing to get Anjali Apatarai elected as the next leader of the BC NDP in an election which we pretty much won, but we did not get to follow through on because of a corrupt system. So I guess I haven't come here as prepared as my comrades here because I've been really busy. I have been, it has been many late nights, many long days, every day, nonstop for months. But I am really happy to share what we've been doing, why we've been doing it, and some of the next steps that we envision. And well, that I envision. I'm not going to speak for Anjali, but we are going to be working together collectively with all of our supporters to come up with next steps together, because whatever we do, it has to be united. It needs to be together as one. But a little bit of background about me beyond just those titles and roles. I am the daughter of a trade union organizer. My father is an organizer of the Carpenters Union. My mother was the first insulator, first woman insulator in her union. She smashed that glass ceiling. I am Anishinaabe and mixed race, Lebanese and French Canadian. I am very concerned about the climate crisis. I am a feminist. In 2010, I had a little bit of a political awakening, starting with feminism, and became an anarchist. So I come from an anarchist background, but over the years, I have interrogated my ideas and found that I'm more comfortable identifying as a democratic socialist. But the anti-authoritarian strike is pretty strong, I would say, and I definitely am somewhat of a syndicalist still. So that is kind of my background and how I came to be. A few years ago, after taking a bit of a hiatus from political organizing, doing Indigenous solidarity work, anti-pipeline activism, and feeling the brunt of police brutality in doing that work and suffering from PTSD from that work, I went to be a hippie for a few years on an island where I did that interrogation of my ideas and started to think about, well, how can I best serve my community and make a difference in this world especially as the climate crisis became more and more apparent that it's way more dire than we thought. So I had this radical notion, and I guess maybe I was a little bit bored on my little hippie island, but I decided that since I couldn't organize pipeline rallies and marches or anti-pipeline marches, I would do something else. I would join the BC and fight for those core democratic socialist values that lie in the Constitution and that have this beautiful history that have given us all these social programs because of the likes of organizers like Bob Williams and other NDP heroes who fought the good fight before us, giving us all of the programs and things that we benefit from today that we take for granted. And as the daughter of a union organizer, my father's always told me at length all of how much we had to fight to get what we have today. And so I guess I live in that world of ideas and a lot. And what did it take to get us here? And I did do a history major because it was one of my passions, is learning how did we get to this point and where can we go from here and how can we learn from the mistakes of the past. So I got involved in the BCNDP and I decided that I would take my Indigenous solidarity into the trenches, into the heart of the beast. And I started working to bring forward a moratorium on LNG development. And people thought I was nuts. And maybe I am. But it was a hard fight. But I found that the grassroots of the NDP were right there with me. My motion for a moratorium on LNG was unanimously adopted by my entire EDA at the Electoral District Association at an AGM. Everyone was in support of it. And so I took it to the convention and they put it at number 54 and it never got spoken on. And I started to understand through trial and error that there are lots of barriers in the party to democratic participation, and that even though the Constitution says that it's a party that puts people before profit, that wasn't necessarily true. And so being the daughter of an organizer, that's what I set out to do, was to start organizing. And I started working with others, and I was asked to run as the chair of the Standing Committee on Environment and Economy. And I started to put together a plan to do everything we could to actually address the climate crisis in a way that's in alignment with our social democratic socialist values, and get people to work together for this. And I realized that the reason that there were all these barriers to democratic participation was because our party had been gutted. The membership had been driven out by all these top-down decision-making and all these terrible decisions that were made on environmental policies like LNG and Site C and old growth logging. They drove out something like 9,000 members. So it was very apparent to me that we needed grassroots revitalization of this party. And we needed someone to inspire everyone. And so I looked forward to a leadership race whenever that would happen. And then it did happen. And when that opportunity came up, we got to work. We did a lot of work leading up to it, a lot of grunt work. But it paid off because we ended up signing up tens of thousands of people. I heard yesterday morning that was 30,000 people. We'll never know what the membership list, because they won't tell me. But we know it was a lot. And we did something incredible. We did something amazing. We worked our butts off. But we shared our vision. We shared our vision for what a Green New Deal for BC could look like, what a New Deal for BC that puts people before profit could look like. And the vision was so beautiful. And when people got a sense of that vision, it struck so much hope that hadn't existed before. And of course, the undemocratic actions of the party went out of their way to squash it. But I think it was a calculated move that they made, not so much because they wanted to disqualify Angélique, but because they wanted to crush the influx of members that came into the party. They want to drive them out and keep them from understanding the power that they have, that we have when we work together collectively. So I guess that brings me to next steps. In my ideal vision, which is something that I've been working on for years now, as you can tell, it's to take back the NDP and bring it back to its democratic socialist roots and make it and not abandon it, as so many others would like to do. And I understand that the democratic socialist movement is quite diverse. We can see that on this panel, but there's a risk to fracturing our movement. And that risk is that we are in the midst of this rising far right movement, and we see fascism on the horizon. We see it because we've had 40 years of neoliberalism, 40 years of union bashing, 40 years of austerity that's created extreme income inequality and division, and people are angry. And when people are angry, they look for scapegoats and easy answers. And the far right likes to offer that up. And it's very easy for them to do so because bias and inequality do exist. And as was referenced earlier, this hegemony of ideas that exists, the boss's ideas, these ideas that are enforced by this corporate world that is currently in charge, those ideas are antithetical to our values of equality, of equity, of making sure that we're taking care of each other, that we're investing in public good and investing in each other and building a better world for everyone. And we are facing existential crises. The climate crisis is existential in nature. It's terrifying. That's why I organize, because organizing is the only antidote I have to despair. And I think that's the case for many people. But also having a vision that we can see. Angélie's given us this vision, and it's not just her vision, it's many of our visions. It's a collection of all of our hopes and dreams of how we can actually have a democratic socialist society that takes care of each other. And now that we've seen that vision, I don't think people are going to be willing to give it up so easily. I think nothing less will suffice. So we have to work together, and we have to build upon the movement that we've built. And I've talked about this a little bit before, yesterday at the rally. When I lived in Quebec in 2012, I was there for the Maple Spring, and it was beautiful. Everyone was in the streets. Everyone was banging their pots and pans. It inspired me, and I moved there for 3 years. But it was incredible, and they were able to stop the tuition fee hikes. And they did it through mass organizing and mobilization. And it seemed like it came out of nowhere, like this amazing movement of hundreds of thousands of people that won. But it didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of hard organizing on the ground every day, day in and day out, for the long game, the long struggle. that's how they created that movement. And that's how movements come and go. You have to create the groundwork for it. You have to, like the Zapatistas in Chiapas, that was a movement that came out of liberation theology organizing in these churches that set up the foundation for it. When we do that organizing in our communities at the local decentralized level, then we can create the conditions for mass mobilization because it's ready to go. It's there, ready to be tapped into and activated. And so that's what I would like to do for the next steps. I would like to work together with others to do that grassroots organizing, decentralized organizing, so that in alignment with this vision that we have for a made in BC Green New Deal or a democratic socialist society that addresses the crises. In alignment with that vision, if we work together to create these autonomous organizing hubs, and it doesn't have to be within the BCNDP, it can be inside or outside, I don't really care, but it does have to be willing to use the political apparatus that's available to us. And I think that it is a pull back and forth between social movements and political organizing within a political party structure. I think that they have to work together and interact constantly, and that one needs to follow the other, and that is that political parties should be following social movements, because social movements, as Anjali said, are always ahead. So I think that that's what we need to do, is work together, keep organizing, keep building up what we've got now, and keep going forward, and make sure that we're willing to do whatever it takes to win, because we have so much on the line. Like, my children don't seem to have a future, but I have this vision. We have this vision for a future where they actually have a livable planet in a society that's not a dystopic fascist world that nobody wants. So we have to build it. We have to keep building it. We have to keep fighting. And we have to work together. And we have to have that dialogue that Dimitri mentioned earlier, because dialogue is key. We're going to have disagreements. I mean, I disagree with him on what he said about Ukraine. As an Indigenous person, I stand in solidarity with the Ukrainians because I know what it's like to be the victim of genocide by imperialists. But regardless of our diversity of opinions, we do need to work together and figure out, how do we have that dialogue? How do we have respectful engagement? And how do we find our commonalities? Because we have more in common than we have differences. So I don't know if I had my 15 minutes or if I've gone over, but I feel like I've been talking a lot.
No, that was great, Ashley. Thank you. If you're okay, we can end it there and go to Bob, and then we'll come back around for some discussion.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So Bob and Am, I'm going to turn it over to you.
So, Am, thank you, and thank everybody, brothers and sisters. It's really neat to hear all these views, and my own history is different, as we all are. I grew up in Vancouver's East Side, which is historically our strongest left center in British Columbia, and I came up through the party itself at the neighborhood level, and so I have great respect for the average working class person that makes up that riding, and I had great respect for the historic CCFers that were there, and I then went on through schools on the east side and to UBC, and ended up wanting to become a city planner, a town planner, and having an impact on my part of the city, which was forgotten in many ways, and which had never had any representation at City Hall. So in the writing, I convinced everybody, okay, I'm ready to go. Are you willing to help me? And it all happened. And I ended up winning a seat on city council that beat out, the strongest communist running and the strongest capitalist running. So I just slivered in there. And they thought it was a great thing to, in the last minute, announce that I was an NDPer. Well, that actually got some of the NDP out, and I ended up beating the communists by about 1,000 or so votes, and that was that. But it was a fun thing. A city council in those days was not a harsh left-right capitalist socialist entity at all. And I found out that, with ability, you could convince them about things. Well, wow, I wasn't expecting that with what was essentially a right-wing council. And then I started, well, if you really use your brains, you can bloody well make a difference. And so I ended up getting to be friends with with all of them really, but some of them were more right and difficult to deal with. But in the end, I mean, we had a city council where if you didn't own property, you couldn't run. What the hell is going on here? And I ended up checking the UN Charter of Rights and Eleanor Roosevelt's stuff, who I still greatly admired. And I finally talked a majority quietly into letting tenants run for public office in Vancouver. There was one final guy that I really liked, but he was an old Tory, Aeneas Bill Irving, and I said, Aeneas, most of your friends are leaving their houses and moving into apartments, and they didn't have any formal property rights in the apartments. I said, that's not right. And I convinced him of it, and I ended up getting a majority. And, that shocked them, and we got that, and that's 60 years ago, God knows when. And so it gave me a real initiative to say, yeah, we can actually do things, change things, and be principled about it. And so after a couple of years, the old timer that had been the MLA just wanted to go, and he hadn't wanted to go until he found somebody to replace him. And then he was convinced I was the replacement. So that was that. I ended up in the provincial government. But in the meantime, I became really interested in planning and became a city planner and all the rest of that. But I guess I never quite saw it, despite everything, in a totally ideological sense. And I'm getting that sense out of our collective here that it is more of an ideological sense. And that doesn't cut ice with people that aren't of the same ilk. I have sympathies for all of this, needless to say. But at the same time, there's more than one way to skin a cat, And so coming from the writing I came from, I have no trouble being a democratic socialist. But I subsequently, after I had experience in government and was really running a few departments of government and changing a zillion things, and I was just about 40 years old and I had all the energy in the world, and so others in cabinet wanted me to essentially run their department for them. So there was no limit to what one could do in the Barrett government, virtually no limit. So we created the ALR in terms of saving agricultural land. In British Columbia, all these goddamn mountains we got here are still ours. They are still ours, damn it. But the forestry companies have licensed them and split them off and so on and dumbed us down. They've told us it's just fiber. Can you believe that the Grand Mountains of British Columbia are just bloody fiber? No, they're not. They're amongst the greatest pieces of land in the world. And so land in BC, while clouded by Aboriginal title, is ours. And I mean 100% of us. And we have to work it out with the Aboriginal people, how we share it over time and distance. And to, I honestly I'm also a supporter of Henry George, an early American radical economist who believed that land was the property of all the people. In British Columbia, 95% of it still formally is. And we do our annual reporting in BC without noting down that asset. Annual report, British Columbia, assets, liabilities. 95% of the province is ours, and we don't list it. We don't list it. And I have to say that I can't share your terminology, the stolen lands. No, come on now. No, they're clouded. They're clouded title, but they are not stolen lands. They are everybody's land in this province, formally, legally, in every way. So I'm sorry, I have trouble with that. But I mainly wanted, then after all of politics and all the rest of it and doing a zillion things, I and some friends ran for the leadership of Van City Credit Union, our biggest credit union in British Columbia. And we won. And gradually over a few years, and I was there 20 years as I was in provincial government, we ran the joint. We stole the bloody bank. Hello out there. The people in British Columbia know that Democratic Socialists stole the bank, the biggest collective bank in the province. Well, we did. And we started the planning. I'm a pretty good business planner, I found out, better than anybody on their staff. And so I was able to tour North America to look at the best community banks. And I found them and found the best people. And they led me to Bologna and Italy and the collective, if you will, cooperative way they ran that state. And it's been a history of collective or community cooperation for the last 100 years, right from the days of the Po River Valley, when they had to train it and control flooding, they had to jointly get together and cooperate. And out of all that, it's the most developed cooperative part of the planet. It's exciting as hell. And there's a depth to it. You immediately feel once you're there in Bologna, which is a charming city, and the Italians, how more charming can you get? And one of the oldest university in Europe, the oldest university back, almost back to and some of the early economists from Napoli and Bologna had a sense of community. And so Stefano Zamagni, who had been leading all that there for his lifetime, has ended up having another view of the nature of the world we want to create. And he talks about the triangle in terms of what society is about. One side of the triangle is the marketplace. And we all know that that's capitalism, but the marketplace is not necessarily capitalism either. In their case, the marketplace, they have one business for every 12 citizens. Think of it. Think of how diverse this is. One business for every 12 citizens. And then they have 80 some substantial co-ops that operate networks. Imagine 80, 90 cooperatives that are networks. The Chamber of Commerce, for example, there is 700 people. 700 people that do collective work for all the individual firms and create coalitions and marketing for the world and so on. So they've got this enormous diversity, which is wonderful. And then they've got this collective system. And then, in the 70s, the mid-level left and the mid-level right got together, and they finally created the wonderful things we know, like Tuscany and Emilia-Romagna, where Bologna is, and then created Ervet, which is they use to strengthen all of their particular businesses. So the best research arms are there. And so you get that rich collective thing. Their Minister of Labor, for God's sake, is their head of the trade unions in Emilia-Romagna is the Minister of Productivity. When I tell that to businessmen here in Vancouver, they're thunderstruck. The idea that that could be so. But the truth is that labor and capital or business actually see common ground as a base. So that's extraordinary. So you've got this idea of the citizen, what the economy is, and it's on one side of the triangle is redistribution and the Keynes view of the welfare state, the modern Western society. On the other side is the exchange and market. But the other side of the triangle is reciprocity and the building of social capital and cooperative enterprises and relationship goods. Stefano's come up with that term, relationship goods. You start getting all this mixed together, and the old historic, Marxist left starts crumbling in many ways. In many ways, these people really do cooperate and work together and feel common cause. So the whole idea of reciprocity, which we've finally picked up again for dealing with indigenous people, and it's God knows appropriate and long overdue, is the right way to go. And I've been convinced, and I created the Columbia Basin Trust. BC is this diverse range of mountains, and I think there's about 6 macro regions that we are more diverse physically than any province in the country by far. And so when an old professor of mine dealt with the Columbia Basin Treaty and was worried, he was the guy that compensated people for their land when it got flooded. And he said to me, Bob, when you get a chance later, you may be able to do something about their whole lifestyle has been changed. And so we created this Columbia Basin Trust for the whole basin. And then we said, you're going to share the rent. You are going to share the rent. And most leftists don't understand this goddamn idea of rent. The land is rent. And those capitalists have taken it from us. Those forestry people have taken it from us. Yes, we have to clean it up. And in terms of the game. But the idea that we say this is all stolen land and our native people own it, God damn it, that is so stupid. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. And I know I'm going to offend you. But it's naive. It's absolutely naive to think that the idea of private property should be in the hands of 5% of the population. That is absolute bloody nonsense. And you're not going to get elected on that one, I'm afraid. But underneath all of the stuff I hear from all of us is true common ground around, and we've come a long way. But we haven't come to this point where we see citizenship in this way that the people in Bologna do. That's truly constant, truly generous. And that has to be what we're seeking, is a real generosity of spirit. The academics in this great university are arguing that cooperation creates a generosity of spirit that starts flowing through everything. And it's not a rigid line between the left and the right, despite my sympathy for the left. But we have to get away from the old historic tight Marxist view and the naive view that Aboriginal people own all of our land. So that's not exactly what I intended to say. And it's a response partly to you, but I hope you're not offended and we can have a real dialogue.
Thank you very much, Bob. So that's our first round. Thank you so much, everyone. That gave us a lot to think about. And I know we have a real diversity of folks here in terms of where we come from, our involvement or lack thereof in electoral politics or law, as it goes. So I I want to give everyone perhaps a chance to respond. I know we had a lot there before I dive into the questions. Did anybody have a response immediately or anything that came up that they might want to add? We're doing okay? Okay, so one of the themes that has come up in the questions is something that I think we've seen in our other panels over the last 2 days as well, which is a real frustration, especially in British Columbia, with the BC NDP. And of course, we heard from Ashley, we can, I think, sense how hard this has been for everyone and how exhausting. And a few of the questions, to sort of group them up together in the Q&A, are around this balance between developing, organizing activism within a party and then grassroots or outside of the party. And a few of our participants have asked, what's the case for building a new left-wing party? Can we still see our vision within a party like the BC NDP or perhaps another provincial party or even the federal NDP? Or is it time to move to new places? And I know we're not all located here in BC, so this doesn't have to be a BC focused conversation, but we've heard a lot over the conference around this idea of grassroots organizing. And does anyone sort of have any thoughts on whether, do we start anew if we are so frustrated, or can we work from within? And Ashley, I see you first, so go ahead.
I have lots of ideas on this, and I know that it's controversial because I get trolled all the time on it. I think that we should work within the BC NDP because it is a democratic socialist party. It's in our constitution that it's democratic socialist, that we are supposed to put people before profit. And I think that just because there's rot in the house doesn't mean you bulldoze the house. It means you take the rot out, you clean your house and you get rid of the rot. So I feel like we have a responsibility to do that. I also just want to be really pragmatic about it because we are in a crisis, a climate crisis, a health care crisis, a housing crisis, and we don't have much time. And it would just take way too much time to build a new party. The BC NDP is an $11 million asset. It's a machine. It has a very comprehensive voter database. It has all of the tools that one needs to be electorally successful. It just needs leaders and vision and true leadership to make it happen. So I am inclined to organize a slate for the next convention to hold all of the executive members who voted against democracy accountable, and to make sure that we're promoting people to those leadership positions who are going to be respecting the democratic process, ensuring that there's due process, and ensuring that that we get rid of the barriers to democracy in our party, because there are many that have been put there by people who are closely entwined with the fossil fuel industry, but they're barriers that can be easily taken down. And it would be a shame to give up on the party that has such a rich legacy of creating so many good programs for British Columbians, and the party that has Tommy Douglas and Rosemary Brown and Agnes McPhail, and like, this is the party that is actually the home of democratic socialists. So I don't want to burn it down. I want to clean it up, and just pragmatically, it's a lot easier to clean it up than to. The other thing is, they were, like I said earlier, it was a cold calculation to disqualify Angeli because they don't want the members to stick around. They're more afraid of the members organizing and taking them out of their little, taking them off their throne in this little empire that they've built for themselves. And they know that once people understand how easy it is to organize, that they won't have those thrones for very long. So I think that that's what we need to do, is just work together to organize at the EDA level, run slates at every EDA, and run a slate at the executive, at the convention for the executive, and then have a very strong platform with very concrete ways of democratizing the party again. I know that's controversial. People don't like it because there's an emotional response. Like, why should I give these jerks any more money or time when they're so abusive? I understand that. They didn't give me my nomination package when I asked for it. I have experienced the brunt of the party's undemocratic behaviors. I know what it's like, but I also know that it's worth fighting for. And if we want to stand a chance of actually addressing the climate crisis in a way that is tangible and real, it's our best opportunity to do that, to create a big tent left-wing movement that can actually take the means of production or create the means of production to take the state and all of the abilities of the state to actually funnel it towards the programs that we need to address the climate crisis, which are many. And I told you earlier that I used to be an anarchist and I had to kind of examine those ideas. And one of the things that kind of got me thinking about how to actually make effective change was reading Seth Klein's book, A Good War, and understanding that there are real tangible ways that we can actually address the climate crisis, but it requires a state-led response because we're not going to garden our way out of the climate disasters. We have to have strong social programs that are resilient and create resilient communities that are taking care of everyone and that are not alienating the working class. Because if we alienate the working class, we will have fascism. So that's why I believe strongly that we need to clean our house up.
Thanks, Ashley. Dimitri,
I have-
you want to jump in?
Yes, I have a rather different point of view from Ashley, and so it's not only on Ukraine we disagree, but with the greatest of respect. I do want to say one thing quickly about Ukraine, Ashley, and that is I don't believe that sending more weapons to Ukraine and encouraging the people of Ukraine to prolong this war is standing with Ukraine. I think the way that we stand with Ukraine is bringing this war to an end as quickly and as peacefully as possible. So I know, because I get this response frequently when I express the views that I do about this war, you know, that kind of response that you gave. And I just don't think that's pro-Ukrainian, unfortunately. But we can have that discussion perhaps in another time in greater detail. With respect to political parties, I'm going to talk about a few other examples of what the travesty, the utter travesty that we've just seen unfold in BC, in the BC NDP. And let me say, in the interest of full disclosure, I do continue to be technically a member of the Green Party of Canada. I am not a member, obviously, I reside in Quebec. I'm not a member of any provincial party in BC. But even though I'm a member of the federal party, I am about as close to giving up on the federal party as one could possibly imagine. And for me, the last straw was when Lorraine Reckmans, the first Indigenous president of the Green Party of Canada, resigned over the summer. That was a bridge too far for me. And it became apparent to me very quickly that I think fundamentally the reason that Lorraine felt the need to resign was because Lorraine acted with independence. She was a truly independent president, not beholden to any particular political faction within the party. And that's why she was driven out. And, you know, we have plenty of examples of this in Western politics. I mean, you know, Jeremy Corbyn built the Labour Party into the largest political party in Europe, not just in Britain, in Europe. And he is today as marginalized a politician as one can possibly imagine. He's been expelled from his own party, and the media has completely demonized Mr. Corbyn. He is the best thing that ever happened to British politics in my lifetime. And look where he is today. And then let's look at the so-called squad, you know, in the Democratic Party. These people have been making exactly the argument that Ashley just made. We can reform the Democratic Party from within. It's a massive structure. It has, you know, resources. It has, you know, mobilized people at the ground level all around the country. It makes far more sense for us to effectively mount an insurrection, a peaceful insurrection within the Democratic Party, than to try to build another party ourselves. And where has that gotten them? How are the policies of the Biden administration any more progressive than those of his predecessors, including Trump, frankly? If you look at the totality of Biden's policies, especially in the foreign affairs file, I think you'd have a very difficult time arguing that he's significantly more progressive than Donald Trump was. So what have they done? Now they're actually, in the so-called squad, is actually supporting the retrograde policies of the Biden administration and holding him out as being the greatest hope for the progressive movement, when he's exactly the last thing that the progressive movement needs in the United States. So this is a phenomenon we have seen across the West. The established political parties are constructed in such a way as to stifle any revolutionary movement. That's what they do. That's their primary function. And I think we're kidding ourselves, frankly, with the greatest respect to all those who disagree with me, not just within the NDP, but within my own party, the Green Party of Canada. I think we're fooling ourselves if we think we're going to achieve any kind of revolutionary change through the established political parties. Now, I'm painfully aware of the obstacles involved in starting a new political party, which is precisely why I myself am not convinced that I want to invest my time and energy in doing that. I'm asking myself whether electoral politics makes any sense at all. Maybe this is a system from which we should all go on strike and go into the streets and mount one general strike after another and bring the economy to a halt. Maybe that'll get their attention. Maybe that will achieve some dramatic transformational changes. But I'm deeply skeptical that we can do it through electoral politics, and I'm absolutely convinced that we're not going to do it through the BC NDP, the NDP, the Green Party of Canada, or any existing political party that has seats federally or provincially. Sorry to be so negative about that, but that's my own conclusion after years of trying to change the system from within.
That's
might-
okay.
Respond to that?
I might let it go to Ben first, if that's okay, Ashley, and then we can come back to you.
Okay, thanks. And I thought I would jump in before my good friend Bob, because I want to hear his feedback on my views. I think both scenarios are viable options that should be properly analyzed by leftists. When I think about the strengths of the NDP, I think about Bob's record, and I know it, having worked with him for 7 years and publishing his memoir, just some of the highlights: doubling protected areas of parkland all around the province, more than doubling the inventory of decommodified socially owned homes, creating BC housing, and actively developing socially owned homes as an alternative to market housing. Those just jump out as, if the socialist objective of decommodifying the necessities of life, even the farmland, taking the price tag, there's obviously huge price tags on farmland, but freezing the development rights and exercising the public interest in stating in legislation that the appropriate use of farmland is farmland, not land banking for market housing or other uses. Those are, even if they weren't saying they were expressly socialist policies, their opponents certainly said as much. So the state can be an agency for decommodifying aspects of the necessities of life. And I think Bob's record speaks to that. Certainly from a Marxist-Leninist critique of the Barrett government would find many shortcomings. But in terms of the limits of state power in North America, the government that Bob was a leading member of stands out as an example of what organized citizens can do, and essentially an example of organized compassion in a democratic context. And so that's, when you think of those strengths, Bob ran for leadership, didn't win, wasn't disqualified. There was more of a left-wing outlier in that 1969 leadership convention. I think his name was maybe John Conway, a member of the Waffle from SFU. He was able to run. I think he finished 4th on the ballot. I think it was Tom Berger won and then blew the general election. Dave Barrett was 2nd. Bob was 3rd. And this left-wing Waffle socialist outlier, John Conway, was 4th. That's how democracy should run in a social democratic party. You can stand, the members decide. The question is, if the NDP has morphed so far from the trappings of being a democratic organization that Does it make sense to prop it up and resuscitate it and rebuild a democratic impulse within it? Or are there other alternatives? Dimitri talks about the syndicalist option of general strikes. Even within the electoral option, you have to wonder, would 10 Greens in the House shock the NDP in a way more than an internal fight at a convention or a takeover at the ridings or at a convention? And you do wonder, that's one language politicians understand, the threat of electoral defeat and the threat of losing seats. So I think that's an option that leftists have to have on the table. Even if the words democratic socialism aren't in the Green Party constitution, the fact is they're an oppositional force. Sonia Furstenau is closer to the grassroots than most NDP MLAs. She's a fighter. She arguably is more of a socialist than most NDP MLAs. I don't think Adam Olsen is a socialist, but he's close to the grassroots, and he's someone I've been able to work with over the years. So there is a question of entryism within the Greens. The NDP accused the Greens of entryism in the NDP. Well, there's the question, should Angeli's supporters go en masse into the Greens, take as many NDP seats as possible, and just have a short-term strategy over the next 2 to 4 years of trying to grab as many seats and make the biggest possible bang for climate justice and social justice possible? So that's an option that I think has to be rigorously analyzed. Those would be my main points. Yeah, I don't think there's a correct answer. These debates over whether to go inside or outside the NDP have existed as long as the NDP and the CCF has existed, and debates over entryism go back to around the time of the Russian Revolution. So they're not new debates for the left, but certainly it's more pressing now given the internal crisis within the NDP, which by my analysis is the biggest internal crisis that organization has ever faced.
Thanks very much, Ben. I know Bob wants to respond on this as well, and then we'll come back to you, Ashley. So Bob, go ahead.
Well, thanks. I needless to say, I'm still, despite everything, sympathetic to carrying on with the NDP. But I think it's naive to think that this isn't a natural phenomenon. Organizations are such that they ache for this kind of takeover, you know, they just do. And actually, if you're going to take it over, take the bloody thing over. And but understand that it's a structure that's been built up over time, and it's dangerous because of what it is. It doesn't want to be tackled. It's an institution, and that's the problem. It's an institution, and you're going to have to flood the bloody thing in order to have these other points of view applied. No, you may end up falling, say you do it, and you fall flat on your face, and we go down, and so we've only got a handful in the House. Well, then you have to think about that again. But the reality is these are all human institutions, human products, and they're real. They're not, and it would be regardless of the name of the party, it would still be that way. So, you know, just understand you've got a lengthy piece of work here. Now, I've been outside this more recent one that you guys have been involved in with your candidate. And as I hear you, I have some sympathy for what you're saying. At the same time, I do know Elizabeth Cull, and I know that she has certainly been, as far as I know, a principled person. So if she's found elements here that she thinks are hard to swallow, I've been ready to buy that, but I have no personal view at all or experience. And as I listen to you on this subject, I have some sympathy for what you're saying, that you really have, I think most of you, seen it as a major kind of catastrophe. And I'm hearing you, but it's more recent. At the same time, I do know the guy who's now the premier, and I was blown away by his capacity. This guy is super bright. There's no two ways about it. And he ended up taking on, you know, the most marginalized people in our society as the smart, bloody lawyer activist. And he ended up moving into Point Grey, which historically, God, for socialists, where the hell are we if we're electing somebody there? And he's effectively conveyed arguments that give the people the feeling that, yes, they can support this socialist. And that's significant in itself. So and I do think he handled it badly. I think there was an element of arrogance there that was not marketable, and it's got to stop, or he won't go anywhere. But I'm partly hearing new stuff here, and I do appreciate that from you all.
Thanks, Bob. So Ashley, back to you.
There's so much to respond to. Oh my goodness. Thank you for your wisdom, Bob. It's very good to hear your perspective. I won't comment on David Eby, but I will go back to some of the things that were said earlier, specifically what Dimitri was saying about how about not working within the BCNDP and instead focusing on social movements. And something that's come up in this campaign a lot over the last couple of months was this concept of yes and, when we had to make decisions on what we were going to do. Yes, and I think we should have strong social movements and be working on that and dedicating a lot of time to strengthening the labor movement, and not just the labor movement, but also the climate justice movement, the feminist movement, all of the different movements. I think we need to be involved in it and strengthening it, but also doing it in conjunction with party politics, because you need one to achieve the other. And so in my ideal, it would be great to have the EDAs, the electoral district associations, actually act as organizing hubs that can work with those groups and do the outreach that's necessary to create a large network for mutual aid, organizing and cooperation, and strengthening connections with all of the different organizations in the community so that they can be prepared for the election that's coming up. I mean, that's just basic grassroots organizing that should be happening anyways, and it's not, but we can use those electoral district associations as community organizing hubs, and they can actually enact the values that they say they have as democratic socialists by doing that. And a good example of that was my old MP, Rachel Blaney, making sure that we're out there feeding people when they're hungry, which I was like, yes, that's what we should be doing as New Democrats. We should be feeding people. So just basic things like that, just that grassroots organizing that should be happening on a local level. We can do that within these pockets, as well as also working towards our electoral goals of political change. So I think that we should never do anything alone as a tactic. I believe strongly in a diversity of tactics. But if we are going to work electorally, we should always do it together, because we're stronger when we work together, and unity and collective action is the basis of socialism. And that's what we need to counter the rise of the far right, and especially the hegemonic power of the capitalist system, which is very powerful. And I'm sure everyone has seen the little fish and the big fish. The little fish all team up together and go after the big fish, because you can only do it collectively. The people united will never be defeated. So that brings me to the fact that we have all of these people that we signed up to become BCNDP members. It's a lot of people. I don't know if it's 10,000 or 30,000, but it's a lot of people. So if we are able to effectively organize them to run these slates, as I've suggested, I think we have a very good chance of actually making an impact there. So has the BCNDP wandered so far off from its roots that it is not redeemable? Well, I got elected and I'm like a very vocal Indigenous solidarity activist who's organized against Line 9 and Energy East and Coastal GasLink pipeline. And I've been pretty vocal for a very long time. So I don't know, they elected me. The grassroots elected me. If I could win, I think that I think we have a chance. And so I don't know, maybe that's maybe I'm being hopeful, but I think that we always have a chance when we give people a vision and we inspire hope and we show that there is an option forward, and there are options forward for democratic socialism that's also based on reconciliation, which I think is a conversation that's important and not quite present in this one. But I'll bring it as the only Indigenous person here. So another idea that one of my team members had for going forward was to have a political action committee, a PAC, that does organizing for to help eco-socialists. And it doesn't matter whether they're running in the NDP or the Greens. I thought that was an interesting idea. Probably one that will be discussed at the General Assembly that's coming up. Did I mention that we're probably going to have a big General Assembly to discuss next steps? So I hope that you guys will be there, because it is a big discussion. What do we do now that we've mobilized all of these people? Whatever we do, we have to do it together, because we're stronger when we work together, and we cannot fracture the left. And the right knows that. That's how Harper got his majority for so many years, because he had a big tent. So I guess that's my response to all of those comments.
Thanks so much, Ashley. That was great. So we'll leave it there, I think, for our first question, but that actually leads me well into what I wanted to pose to our panel as sort of our second question grouping, which is going back to actually Dimitri's opening of our discussion today. There was a lot of, I think, the idea of listening and dialogue and finding common ground with those that we don't agree with, those we might be surprised by, those perhaps on the right, or specifically those in the trucker convoy, what Dimitri was talking about. It seems like some of our audience really, they hear that and they agree with that. But the question is then, how do we use the spaces that we have, whether they are these, grassroots organizing spaces, a new political party, an existing political party, how, if you have any ideas, a vision, how do we make them both a space for this sort of militant, radical, socialist, political identity, and also a space that can be an alternative or a home for both listening and perhaps welcoming in those who we don't necessarily agree with at first blush? Do any of you, I know it's a big question, but does anyone have enough guts to dive in?
I'm happy to start, but
Please go ahead.
Stay on the side if somebody else wants to take a run at this. But look, part of the reason that story that I told about going down to the truckers' protest for 2 days and speaking to people, I mean, there was a space right then and there where we could do this job. Unfortunately, I didn't see anybody else from the left down there. I was like a voice in the wilderness by myself. I thought we screwed up royally. I think that we on the left should have gone down there en masse and started talking to people and engaging with them. Why are you here? I mean, their concerns went beyond, I think the primary motivation for them being there, based on what I saw and heard, was certainly vaccine mandates. But they had a number of complaints about Canadian society, some of which I think people on the left share. And so when these people were massed in the streets from all over the country for several weeks, why didn't we on the left go down there and talk to them and engage them in a discussion? The space was made available, but instead we treated them as pariahs and said, no, we're not going to have anything to do with you. So I think when we see the right galvanized people who maybe we perceive to be, rightly or wrongly, leaning strongly to the right, supporters of a political party of the right, in the streets, causing that kind of a ruckus, that's an opportunity for us to go down there and have conversations that may actually lead to us finding some common ground.
That's great. Thank you. That Ashley, go ahead.
I just want to put a caveat on that. It's not always safe for people to go into those spaces. As a racialized woman, I don't necessarily always feel safe going into a space where that's dominated by hyper-masculine white people. It's not, and I don't think that that's something that should be put on people who face different axes of oppression. I definitely do support and encourage dialogue, and I think it's really essential and important. But I also think that we have to be cognizant that we're not all on the same equal playing level, and that we're not all in the same, we don't all have the same ability to convince people either. So
yeah, I think that's actually a perfectly valid point. And, you know, I would entirely respect the decision of a racialized person not to go down into that space. Absolutely. You know, but those of us like myself who didn't feel threatened in that environment, I think that we can and should take those opportunities to create that dialogue. You know, those of us who can do that without feeling threatened by it, I think we have that responsibility.
absolutely.
Ben, did you want to jump in on this one at all?
But for
I
God's
saw
sake,
I saw Bob gesture. Yeah, I'll defer to
Okay,
Bob.
let's go to Bob
I
then.
mean, for God's sake, anti-vaccination, you got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. My grandmother, for God's sake, was anti-vaccination. She marched in Stanley Park. I had to pack a piece of paper to school every bloody year to say, I'm anti-vaccination. Come on. Where the hell are you going to find any brains in that kind of right-wing mob? You know, we've got nothing to talk to them about. Absolutely nothing.
Well, can I just briefly respond to that?
Go ahead. Yeah.
As I said, I was there, Bob. I talked to people. I listened to them. A number of people told me they were vaccinated. They didn't have a problem with being vaccinated. Their problem was mandates, forcing people to get vaccination. And as I said, this is not a wacko right-wing thing. You can go to the website of the World Health Organization, and there is a lengthy explanation and discussion about the complexities, the ethical complexity around mandating vaccination. Even the World Health Organization does not take an unequivocal stand on the wisdom of vaccine mandates. Their position is it all depends. So this was a legitimate issue that there were some anti-vaxxers down there, no doubt about it. But by the way, even those people, they're still voters. You can't wish them away. They're not going anywhere. You know, saying we're not going to talk to them isn't going to solve the problem of their, you know, irrational hostility to vaccines.
Waste our time. Isn't there more productive stuff to do? I mean,
Let's go to Ben. Ben, do you want to comment on this?
Alicia, was your question specific to anti-vaccination protesters or more broad?
No, it wasn't. It was about how to balance these sort of seemingly competing issues of having a progressive, radical, militant, left-wing group, whether it's a party or not, and a space for dialogue and common ground and reaching out to those who don't normally align with that.
Yeah, I think generally when people are in a fight, leftists should take a close look at helping them. So for example, if it's a group of workers who end up on strike, in most cases, it would make sense for progressives to come down, bring them some coffee, bring them some breakfast sandwiches, some baked goods, maybe some apples or oranges, maybe brandish a picket sign with them. So generally, mobilizing in solidarity of people who are in a fight is how we build a strong social movement. But I think we need to analyze each of those on a case-by-case basis. If it's people in a neighborhood there's a story in Winnipeg of this Wolseley elm, this big, huge elm tree that these women for years defended against the city council trying to destroy it. And it was as much a sense of place and pride in place as it was an issue of environmental, ecological rights. But generally, I think if you have people fighting to protect their corner of the world and they're passionate about it, those are the kind of people we want to run in similar circles with. And that would extend to Wet'suwet'en people fighting the Coastal Gas Link, which right now, I don't know if they've started drilling under the Morris River or not, but it's imminent if it hasn't already started. And I happen to have chosen to align myself with the partisans out at Fairy Creek, and the former premier threw me under the bus for it, but so be it. I felt like I was in good company. So generally, when people are in a fight, we should stand with them, and that's how we build our base of support. I don't know if the truckers are it. One of my closest allies was with them from the beginning. He's an out and out red. He's door knocked for me more than half of the days that I've been out over 6 elections. And he felt like that's where the debate was at, similar to Dimitri's position, that these are working class people. They might not have formal education. They are being exposed to right populist ideas, and that leftists need to be in the fight and presenting them with our ideas. But I do wonder, are we going to build a fighting eco-socialist force by organizing, for lack of a better term? I think the Marxists would call them the lumpen proletariat. I don't know if that is the organizational basis for building the province of our dreams and getting back into having a political formation that could be doing what Bob did a half century ago of doubling our protected areas, doubling our socially owned housing supply, buying forest companies and operating them in the public interest, protecting our arable land and activating it, expanding worker rights and human rights and other social gains. So I don't know if the lumpen proletariat are the social basis that will get us back to that point. So I can see merit in both Bob's and Dimitri's perspectives, but I think I might just tip towards Bob's side on that particular debate. But I think ignoring the lumpen proles in the truckers movement would be a mistake. So I'm going to retreat from that position slightly. I think handing out handbills at their demos for people who feel safe to do so, to provide a counter viewpoint to the alt-right, wouldn't necessarily be counterproductive for bona fide leftists.
May I just clarify one point in response?
Yeah.
Okay, just to be clear, in response to both Ben and Bob.
Oh dear, leaving us on the hanging. I think we might have lost Dimitri for a second. We'll come back to him if he when he rejoins us. I was actually going to say that we are approaching the end of our time here together, which is fantastic. You guys have done really an amazing job of making an hour and a half fly by. So I was going to take the last 15 minutes or so to give everyone a chance to offer their final thoughts or takeaways. We've done obviously a lot of discussing topics today, and it's not always easy conversations, and we're not always going to agree. And Dimitri is back. Perfect.
Sorry about that. I don't know.
That's okay. So I was just saying, Dimitri, that we're gonna kind of give final thoughts and wrap up. So you are first to respond, to clarify, and then to give any final thoughts.
Yeah, I thank you very much. I was going to say that I don't want anyone listening to this conversation to think that I believe that we should be concentrating our efforts on what we perceive to be right-wing protest movements. I'm just saying that that is one of the places where we should be investing some time and energy to create a dialogue. Obviously, I think we're going to make a lot more progress showing up at, for example, a Black Lives Matter protest or a solidarity protest with the Wet'suwet'en people and any number of other actions. Those would be more fertile ground for us, but I don't think we should ignore the type of protest that happened in Ottawa. That's my only point.
Fantastic. And any other takeaways, or you're good for this discussion?
No, that's it. And it's been a pleasure speaking
Awesome.
with you.
Thank you so much, Dimitri. All right. So next up, Ben, any final wisdom or things that you're thinking about?
We've covered a lot of ground, so I don't have a ton to add. I'm just trying to figure out in the chat. I wanted to leave my email address for anyone who wants to be in touch.
Yes, so we don't actually have a like a regular chat. So maybe what you could
Okay.
do, you want to give it to me. We have a
Oh, sure.
number.
Well, it's fairly straightforward. It's Ben. It's basically Ben. Just put an @ sign between my first and last name and add a .ca at the end.
Okay.
And
So
note the
Ben,
spelling of the last name, 1 S, 2 T's. We covered a lot of ground, so I won't repeat it, but I think we have to continue this conversation, both in our local, in our neighborhoods and in our local communities, but also province-wide and nationally in terms of Dimitri and others. So yeah, let's not treat it as a one-off. If we're serious about responding as best we can to the climate crisis, to the inequality crisis, to colonization, and building the strongest possible networks of solidarity, both locally, but it also between communities, let's work at it, dig in. You build the road by walking, 2 people or a group. If you can get more, that's great. But yeah, the road by walking means you inevitably make mistakes, but literally link up with one person, decide what issue you're going to work on, make a plan, decide what your first action is. It might be hosting a meeting. It might be just the 2 of you brandishing picket signs with some demand outside of some institution that's doing something you don't want them to do. Have a potluck after, so you have that social connection and some goodwill and some fun. And there's all these aphorisms, but Rosa Luxemburg, if I can't dance, it's not my revolution. I don't want to be a part of your revolution. Che Guevara, the true revolutionary is guided by deep feelings of love. So we have to have fun and well-being and looking after each other and social goodwill at the same time we confront the existential challenges facing our communities and our species and our planet and the other species as well. So do reach out and let's keep working and pushing together.
thank you so much, Ben. Okay, so next is Ashley. And Ashley, there has been a request to tell us about your General Assembly in a little more detail. Who is having it? Where is it? And how could people join?
It is being planned. So we're taking the weekend off because it's been a long haul. So it will be planned this week and more details will be released. So if you want to sign up, if you haven't already signed up to our newsletter, you can go to angeliforbc.ca to get signed up to our newsletter, and we will let you know when the General Assembly is. It's probably going to be in person and hybrid, but those were the ideas that we had. So it's not guaranteed yet, but we're hoping to have a very large General Assembly likely next week. Details to come. In terms of wrapping up, I just wanted to quickly respond to what was being talked about earlier. I think that we should be dialoguing with the people who are disenfranchised or disillusioned and upset on the right, because I think that it is through that dialogue that we can help them also understand some of the positions that they've taken and where those positions have come from. And I think that's really at the heart of the situation today, and at the heart of this rise of the far right is the fact that fossil fuel industries have been funneling tons of money towards these anti-vax movements and these I Love Canada oil and gas movements, the Yellow Vest movement. There's so much going on there that we could talk about. It would require another weekend together, but I do think that we have to talk about the fact that in Canada, which is kind of like a petro state at this point, there's these massive fossil fuel companies that are infiltrating political movements, whether it's on the left in BC-NDP, for example, or the right with the trucker convoy, that they understand that their time is almost up, that people are not going to sit back and just let them destroy the planet. We're at a point where people are starting to wake up and understand that our planet is dying and that they're reaping billions of dollars and getting and not being held accountable. And we're not going to let that slide. We're going to hold them accountable, and they don't want that to happen. So they're trying to delay it for as much as possible so that they can keep raking in the money for themselves. So I think that when we address what's at the heart of this disenchantment, these upset voters, communities, people who are really upset because, like, let's be real, their economies are being threatened. They rely heavily on the fossil fuel industry, and we haven't diversified their economy. I think about the place where I grew up. I spent most of my childhood in Fort St. John. That community is completely reliant on the fossil fuel industry. I have close family members who rely on fracking to pay their mortgage. And we need a just transition for those communities. We don't just need a just transition for the workers, we need it for the communities because they've been neglected. They don't have, like, I went to school with the worst teachers. We had the worst judges. We had the worst services in the province because they were neglected. And that was a policy decision. That was a decision made in Victoria, which is where I live now, which is where it's very beautiful and protected and cozy, like some strange place. But in the real world, people have it hard, and that is a policy choice. So when we talk about a just transition and we talk about reaching out to those who are being drawn into the right, into the far right, we have to talk about economic justice. So that's all. Thank you. Thank you for having me on this panel. It's been really illuminating and good.
Thanks so much, Ashley. I'll give our final word to Bob. Bob, over to you.
Well, thank you for putting up with my outbursts. And it's been a joy to hear you all. And to hear about Fort St. John, I don't have any doubt about the difficulties up there. So I hear you in terms of your sympathies. But I'd like to remind everybody that we're not that far from another election in BC. And the truth of it is that whatever the other party is, I think they're going to rename themselves. They're dangerous. And their leader has been poisonous in the past. And he's the same person. So we have to consider that. And it's a relatively short period of time between now and when that decision is made. So when you're holding all of these big rallies and you're going to want to dump on the existing guys, think once or twice about it as to whether you like them versus the other guys, and do what you can to change it. God knows it needs change. I have no time for the games they play. I think it's been awful, and I've gone through it myself, and I don't bother with those meetings because I won't change them. And so my breath is wasted and I can do other things that are worthwhile. But in the meantime, think about the alternatives, and they're pretty damn scary. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Bob. Well, thanks again to everyone for joining us. It's been a fantastic 2 days. We've really, I think, had, a lot of despair and a lot of hope, which it seems like we're in that moment right now. And it's been certainly inspiring to be one of the organizers and get to listen to, a bunch of people far smarter than me. So you guys make me think, and you make me hopeful for the future. So thank you for that. And thank you for being here. And we will be circulating the recordings as well as the transcript to all of our panels. So stay tuned for that. And I believe one of the organizing committee members, Robert Hackett, is going to be writing up some pieces in the Tahi. So look out for those as well. Hopefully they will spark a socialist revolution for us all. So we'll say goodbye for now and hope to see you again next year. Thank you so much,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye for now.
Thank you, everyone.